Hello, lovelies. It's your gay auntie. I want to thank you for your patience. I know it's been quite a while since I've posted here to my YouTube, and I want to apologize first and foremost. It takes a good chunk of time to create videos here, edit them, then upload them. Where, like on TikTok, I can just quick shot one thing and be done with it and have it posted to make y'all laugh and smile. These take a lot more time, and so I appreciate y'all. Now, if y'all just joined my YouTube, welcome. If y'all followed me here from TikTok, welcome, babies. I'm glad to have you here. Remember to turn on that notification bell. It's somewhere here, so that way you can be notified and subscribe to me. I'd be glad to have you here. Now, thank you for being patient with me. I'm all settled into my new home. It's very cute. It's a little closer to downtown than I used to be, but I got this place for a steal. I know I was had my fingers and toes crossed to get it. Now I'm in a different area, much different than I used to live, and it's very cute. It's this odd area because around a street over is the super nice houses, rich poo people, and then this little nook is, I call it where us help live, because it's where you can tell it's very government housing complexes like I grew up in, a lot of more working class complexes and small homes like that. So I love the area. It's a little interesting. I've lived in places worse than this, so it has its own little character and charm I'm glad to be a part of. Now, as many of you know from my TikTok, I'm currently working with an organization called Secure Community Network. And in honor of doing so, I'm going to be reading Jewish folk tales. I'm excited. Now, if you don't know what Secure Community Network is, first and foremost, they're an organization that helps provide training and education to protect our Jewish neighbors' places of community, schools, and places of worship, first and foremost. Now, I'm very much anti-Nazis 100%, and I personally have always tried to strive against anti-Semitism as much as I can. So I'm very proud to be working with this organization. And I figured, why not tell Jewish folk tales in order as a way to kind of kick it off as well. So I'm very excited to be making this. And I actually did some research on the organization, make sure they're legitimate. And I actually have a friend whose wife is a rabbi. They're both Jewish. And they said they've worked with this organization as well to secure their synagogue and their temple and their community center and one of the schools in another area of where they live. They work with them as well. So they really are doing good work. And I wanted to verify because I don't want to promote anything that A, I wouldn't want to work with, and B, that I would feel uncomfortable, because I do believe that I have a duty to preach, to walk the walk, because I see so many creators who take on who take advertisers, partner with anybody, work with anybody. And I don't want to do that. That's why you see so few times I actually do advertisements, because so few companies want you to be able to sample anything. But I'm glad to be doing good work in this type of role and working with them. So I just wanted to give you that update and let you know I'm working with them, which is why I'm doing Jewish Folktales. Now, I have this one here pulled up and I'm excited to do it. I found a wonderful book it's called Jewish Fairy Tales and Legends by Aunt Naomi, or Gertrude LANDA. So I'm going to be reading one of those, a couple of those in a series here on my YouTube. And so let's get on into it, baby dolls. So I did a little research and I found this book and I'm super excited. I do want to give a little disclaimer and a personal anecdote of my own, saying that it's very wonderful and beautiful to broaden your scope and learn a little bit about other religions outside your own. I know several of my followers are of the Christian faith, and I have a few that are Jewish, and I think it's wonderful to learn the stories, fairy tales, and or not, of other religions, because they provide a beautiful insight into other beautiful and radiant religions. So I do want to give that disclaimer that this is a Jewish fairy tales and folk tales, so there is a religious component, same thing as there would be with Christian folk tales and fairy tales. So I want to give that before I get into the preface, because I'm going to read the preface. It's absolutely delightful. Now, the very cordial welcome given to my earlier volume of Jewish fairy tales and fables has prompted me to draw further upon rabbinic law in the interest chiefly of the children. How the wise rabbis of old took into account the necessities of the little ones, whose minds they understood so perfectly, is obvious from such legends as those dealing with boyish exploits of the great biblical characters, Abraham, Moses, and David. These I have rewritten from the stories in the Talmud and Midrash in a manner suitable for the children of today. I have ventured also beyond the confines of those two wonderful compilations. There is a wealth of delightful imagination in the legends and folklore of the Jews of a latter period which is almost entirely unknown to children. I have drawn also on these sources for some of the stories here presented. My desire is to give boys and girls something Jewish which they may be able to regard as companion delights to the treasury of general fairy lore and childish romance. Aunt Naomi. London, March 1919. Oh, that was all well over 100 years ago. So we're getting to peer into the past. Now, once again, shuck any preconceived notions and just delight in the lore and fairy tales of something you're not used to, because it's beautiful and wonderful and just absolutely delightful. Now, like I said, or I'm not sure if I said it in this edit, but this is the first time I'm reading these right off the cuff with y'all here. And I'm going to go into the first one of this compilation called The Palace of the Eagles. East of the land of the rising sun there dwelt a king who spent all his days and half his nights in pleasure. His kingdom was on the edge of the world, according to the knowledge of those times, and almost entirely surrounded by the sea. Nobody seemed to care what lay beyond the barrier of rocks that shut off the land from the rest of the world. For the matter of that, nobody appeared to trouble much about anything in that kingdom. Most of the people followed the example of the king and led idle, careless lives, giving no thought to the future. The king regarded the task of governing his subjects as a big nuisance. He did not care to be worried with proposals concerning the welfare of the masses, and documents brought to him by his advisers for signature were never read. For aught he knew, they may have referred to the school regulations of the moon instead of the laws of trading and such like public matters. "Don't bother me," was his usual remark. "You're my advisers and officers of states. Deal with affairs as you think best." And off he would go to his beloved hunting, which was his favorite pastime. The land was fertile, and nobody had ever entertained an idea that bad weather might some year affect the crops and cause a scarcity of grain. They took no precautions to lay in stocks of wheat, and so when one summer there was a great lack of rain and the fields were parched, the winter that followed was marked by suffering. The kingdom was faced by famine, and the people did not like it. They did not know what to do, and when they appealed to the king, he could not help them. Indeed, he could not understand the difficulty. He passed it off very lightly. "I am a mighty hunter," he said. "I can always kill enough beasts to provide a sufficiency of food." But the drought had withered away the grass and the trees, and the shortage of such food had greatly reduced the number of animals. The king found the forest empty of deer and birds. Still, he failed to realize the gravity of the situation, and what he considered an exceedingly bright idea struck him. "I will explore the unknown territory beyond the barrier of the rocky hills," he said. "Surely I will find a land of plenty, and at least," he added, "it'll be a pleasant adventure with good hunting." A great expedition was therefore arranged, and the king and his hunting companions set forth to find a path over the rocks. This was not at all difficult, and on the third day a pass was discovered among the crags and peaks that formed the summit of the barrier, and the king saw the region beyond. It seemed vast and a beautiful land stretching away as far as the eye could see in a forest of huge trees. Carefully, the hunters descended the other side of the rock barrier and entered the unknown land. It seemed uninhabited, nor was there any sign of beast or bird of any kind. No sound disturbed the stillness of the forest. No tracks were visible. As well as the hunters could make out, no foot had ever trodden the region before. Even nature seemed at rest. The trees were all old, their trunks gnarled into fantastic shapes, their leaves yellow and sere as if growth had stopped ages ago. Altogether, the march through the forest was rather eerie, and the hunters proceeded in single file, which added to the impressiveness of the strange experience. The novelty, however, made it pleasant to the king, and he kept on his way for 4 days. Then the forest ended abruptly, and the explorers came to a vast open plain, a desert through which a wide river flowed. Far beyond rose a mountain capped by rocks of irregular shape. At any rate, they appeared to be rocks, but the distance was too great to enable anyone to speak with certainty. Water, said the vizier, is a sign of life. So the king decided to continue as far as the mountains. A ford was discovered in the river, and once on the other side, it was possible to make out the rocks crowning the mountain. They looked too regular to be mere rocks, and approaching nearer, the king was sure that a huge building must be at the top of the mountain. When they arrived quite close, there was no doubt about it. Either a town or a palace stood on the summit, and it was decided to make the ascent the next day. During the night, no sound was heard, but to everybody's surprise, a distinct path up the mountain was noticed in the morning. It was so overgrown with weeds and moss and strangling creepers that it was obvious that no one had been used for a long time. The ascent was accordingly difficult, but halfway up, the first sign of life, noticed since the expedition began, made itself visible. It was an eagle. Suddenly it flew down from the mountain top and circled above the hunters, screaming but making no attempt to attack. At length the summit was gained. It was a flat plateau of great expanse, almost the whole of which was covered by an enormous building of massive walls and stupendous towers. "This palace is of a great monarch," said the king, though no entrance of any kind could be seen. The rest of the day was spent in wandering round, but nowhere was a door or window or opening visible. It was decided to make a more serious effort next morning to gain entry. However, it seemed a greater puzzle than ever. At length, one of the most venturesome of the party discovered an eagle's nest on one of the smallest towers, and with great difficulty he secured the bird and brought it down to the king. His Majesty bade one of his wise men, Mufflog, learned in bird language, to speak to it. He did so. In a harsh, croaking voice, the eagle replied, "I am but a young bird, only 7 centuries old. I know not. On a tower higher than that on which I dwell is the eye of my father. He may be able to give you information." More he would not say. The only thing to do was to climb the higher tower and question the father eagle. This was done, and the bird answered, "On a tower still higher dwells my father, and yet a higher tower my grandfather, who is 2,000 years old. He may know something, I know nothing." After considerable difficulty, the topmost tower was reached, and the venerable bird discovered. He seemed asleep, and was only awakened after much coaxing. Then he surveyed the hunters warily. "Let me see, let me think," he muttered slowly. "I did hear when I was a tiny eagle chick, but a few years old. That was long, long ago. That my great grandfather had said that his great grandfather had told them that he had heard that long, long ago, ever so much longer than that, a king lived in this palace, that he died and left it to the eagles, and that in the course of many, many, many thousands of years, the door had been covered up by the dust brought by the winds. "Where is the door?" asked Mufflog. That was the puzzle the ancient bird could not answer readily. He thought, and fell asleep, and had to be kept being awakened until at last he remembered. "When the sun shines in the morning," he croaked, "its first ray falls upon the door." Then, worn out with all his thinking and talking, he fell asleep again. There was no rest for the party that night. They all watched to make certain of seeing the first ray of the rising sun strike the palace. When it did so, the spot was carefully noted, but no door could be seen. Digging was therefore begun, and after many hours an opening was found. Through this an entrance was effected into the palace. What a wonderful, mysterious place it was, all overgrown with weeds of centuries. Tangled masses of creepers lay everywhere, over were only trimly kept pathways, and almost completely hiding the lower buildings. In the crevices of the walls, roots had insinuated themselves, and by their growths had forced the stones apart. It was a terrible scene of desolation. The king's men had to hack away laboriously through the wilderness of weeds with their swords to send to the center building, and when they did so, they came to a door on which was an inscription cut deep into the wood. The language is unknown to all but Mufflog, who deciphered it as it follows: "We, the dwellers of this palace, lived for many years in comfort and luxury. Then hunger came. We had made no preparation. We had amassed jewels in abundance, but not corn. We ground pearls and rubies to fine flour, but could make no bread. Wherefore we died, bequeathing this palace to the eagles, who will devour our bodies and build their ears on our towers." A dread silence fell on the whole party when Mufflog read these strange words, and the king turned pale. This warning from the dead past was making the adventure far from enjoyable. Some of the party suggested the immediate abandonment of the expedition and prompt return home. They feared hidden dangers now, but the king remained resolute. "I must investigate this to the end," he said in a firm voice. "Those who are seized by fear may return. I will go on, if needs be, alone." Encouraged by these words, the hunters decided to remain with the king. One of them began to batter at the door, but the king was anxious to preserve the inscription, and after more cutting away of weeds, the key was seen to be sticking in the keyhole. Unlocking the door, however, was no light task, for ages of rust had accumulated. When finally this was accomplished, the door creaked heavily on its hinges, and a musty smell came from the dank corridor that was revealed. The explorers walked ankle deep in dust through a maze of rooms until they came to a big central hall of statues. So artistically fashioned were they that they seemed lifelike in their attitudes, and for a moment all held their breath. This hall was dustless, and Mufflog pointed out that this was an airtight chamber. Evidently, it had been specifically devised to preserve the statues. "These must be the effigies of kings," said his majesty. And in reading the inscriptions, Mufflog said that was so. At the far end, on a pedestal higher than the others, was a statue bigger than the rest. In addition to the name, there was an inscription on the pedestal. Mufflog read it amid an awed stillness. I am the last of the kings, yea, the last of men, and with my own hands have completed this work. I ruled over 1,000 cities, rode 1,000 horses, and received homage of 1,000 vassal princes. But when famine came, I was powerless. Ye who may read this, take heed of the fate that has overwhelmed this land. Take but one word of counsel from this last of the mortals. Prepare thy meal while the daylight lasts. The words broke off. The rest was undecipherable. Enough! Cried the king, and his voice was not steady. This has indeed been good hunting. I have learned in my folly and pursuit of pleasure what I had failed to see for myself. Let us return and act upon the counsel of this king, who has met the end that will surely be our own should we forget this warning. Looking out across the plain they had traversed, His Majesty seemed to see a vision of prosperous cities and smiling fertile fields. In imagination, he saw caravans laden with merchandise journeying across the intervening spaces. Then, as darker thoughts followed, a cloud appeared to settle over the whole land. The cities crumbled and disappeared. The eagle swooped down and took possession of that which man had failed to appreciate and hold. And after the eagles, the dust of the ages settled slowly, piling itself up year by year until everything was covered and only the desert was visible. Scarcely a word was spoken as the king and his hunters made their way back to the east of the rising sun. In all they had been away 40 days when they recrossed the barrier of the rocks. They were joyously welcomed. "What have you brought?" asked the populace. "In a little while we shall be starving." "You shall not starve," said the king. "I have brought wisdom for the palace of the eagles. From the fate of sufferings of others I have learned a lesson. My duty." At once he set to work to organize a proper distribution of the food supply and cultivation of the land. He wasted no more time on foolish pleasures, and in due course the land east of the rising sun enjoyed happiness and prosperity, and even established fruitful colonies in the plain overlooked by the palace of the eagle. Well, I always love good story fairy tales with wonderful lessons. I think this was a beautiful lesson we can all learn and appreciate from, and take to our hearts to grow and prepare for those troubled times. Now, I'm going to continue on with the message from SCN, Secure Community Network. Now, if you want to help, all you got to do is click the URL that's appearing on this screen or has been on the screen. I'm still figuring out YouTube stuff here and all their features. I'll also have it in the description below for you to be able just to click the link, go on and support, and you can either donate if you want to, you ain't got to, or you can just read on what they do and a bit about the community. But just clicking the link really does help. And if you want to donate, you feel inclined, feel free to. Nobody's pushing it to, but if your heart tells you to, go right on ahead. And the link will also be in the description bar below. As always, I'm so glad you're here, baby dolls. I'm so glad you joined for this story time. I'll be reading another one later on this week of these from this specific book of Auntie Naomi's stories. Hold on, let me pull up the name again. Jewish Fairy Tales and Legends. Now, I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I love y'all dearly, and y'all take care now. All right? This added content would not be possible without the love and support from my patrons on Patreon. Now, you can, of course, become a patron of my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ShannonNathan. I have a $3 level. That's $3 a month. You're more than welcome to join. The more the merrier. And it helps to spend more time creating these YouTube and podcast content and much, much more. But let's give a special thank you to my other patrons, some of my patrons. Reza Mills, Lisa Baker, Teal Gill, Ashley Molina Diaz, Brianne, Evil Kitty, Robert Krumanacher, Alistair, Theo Tacos, Courtney Collins, Jessica A. Hecker, Cynthia, Dana Van Zantz, Melissa Holt, Georgie, Beth Leigh Fox, Lauren DiPietro, Matthew Taylor, Chantel Brown, Layla Shipman, Deanna Frederick, Emmanuel Cervantes, Matthew Cosiba, Don Jimenez, Jacqueline, Anne-Marie Flood, Jennifer Mason, Sonia O'Dea, Paula, Malcolm Einhardt, Morgan Martinez, Brandon Arkin, Beast 420, Lisa, Alicia Mitchell, Angie Marmolf 13, Maggie Smith, Jackie Robert, Vivian Morg, Durga, Lisa Matter, Rachel Cade, Chris Tavinia, Lana Mortimer, Devin Johansson, Juliet Page, Space Kitty 87, Erica Warren, Ivana Jade, Hope, Anna Doolin, Megan Krohelek, Gavin Craig, Ellie Mitchell, Marsha MC, Jennifer Bull, Brian Dixon, Bethany Egan's, Angela, Greg Buchanan, Heather Leach, Monroe, and Caroline B. Boy, howdy, that was a long list, and I am very grateful, and I would love to make it bigger. Now, as always, I love you very much. You take care, and take care of yourself, honeys. Bye-bye.